The first thing I noticed was the silence. Not the comforting kind, the kind that wraps around you like a soft blanket, but the sharp, echoing kind, where even the sound of your breath feels like a betrayal. The luxury suite was dark, except for the golden glow from the bathroom door I'd left cracked open. My heels were off. I stood barefoot on cool marble, the hem of my wedding dress trailing behind me like a wounded ghost. In the mirror, I barely recognized myself. My makeup had blurred into shadows beneath my eyes. The lipstick, he said, made me look elegant, not cheap, had faded hours ago. Mascara lines traced my cheeks like runny ink on damp paper. I looked like a woman who had just buried something important, and maybe I had. Behind me, Marcus lay, sprawled across the bed in his tailored shirt, unbuttoned, his black tie askew. He'd passed out mid-laugh after his fourth Negroni. His phone, screen still lit, rested on the nightstand. But I'd heard enough. I hadn't meant to listen. I was in the hallway returning from the rooftop terrace, where I'd gone to gather myself after an awkward dinner with his friends, all investment types with shiny watches and sterile smiles. They didn't know me, not really. To them, I was Eva, the quiet one, or Marcus's wife. Wasn't she a teacher or something? But I'd heard him, clear as the water lapping below the balcony. Look, she's a good person. I mean, come on, she was practically living in that falling apart house. I couldn't just leave her like that. I mean, she needed someone. I helped her. A pause. A laugh. Yeah, call it a good deed. My little charity case. My little charity case. My heart didn't drop. It folded in on itself, collapsed inward like a burnt photograph. No fire, no scream, just ash. I didn't make a sound. Just turned and walked down the hall, slowly, deliberately, as if my body were moving through water. Back inside, I didn't speak. I didn't cry. I unzipped the dress I'd picked out with shaking hands months ago. The one I thought would make me feel beautiful. Chosen. It pooled around my feet in a whisper of silk. I didn't bother folding it. The sheets smelled like him. His cologne, amber and cedar, and something else. That high-end hotel laundry detergent that's supposed to smell like clouds but always reminded me of chemicals. I slid under the blanket, the diamond on my left hand winking at me under the lamplight like it knew a secret. He murmured something incoherent in his sleep, then turned away. I stared at the ceiling. My little charity case. It echoed in the walls, in the fabric of the room, in the sea air pushing gently against the French doors. I thought of my mother's perfume. She used to wear it when she didn't want people to see how hard life had been for her. Jasmine and vanilla, soft but strong. I wished I'd brought it with me. Instead, I smelled like someone else, someone Marcus wanted me to be. Someone polished, grateful, manageable. I turned on my side, away from him, and let my eyes remain open. I could feel the thin gold band around my finger pressing into my palm where I'd curled it. I didn't hate him. Not yet. What I felt was worse. An eerie calm, like standing at the edge of a cliff and realizing you're not afraid to fall. I wasn't falling, though. I was waking up. The pieces fell together in my mind like a mosaic finally seen from a distance. The way he always offered to pay, but made a point to mention it later. The way he'd introduced me as a real sweetheart, rather than anything meaningful. The way he spoke over me in groups, how he always double-checked my stories. That's not quite how it happened, babe. It hadn't registered before. Or maybe I'd chosen not to see it. Tonight, I saw everything. A part of me wanted to wake him up. To scream. To throw the ring into the sea and storm out into the Italian night, barefoot and wild. But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence stretch. Instead, I breathed, slow and steady, until my pulse softened. Because this wasn't the night I'd fall apart. This was the night I began to plan. He thought I was weak. He thought I owed him something. He thought I was his. He doesn't know what he just started. It's strange, the things you remember when you're trying to forget. The smell of old books in the hallway. The creak of the third stair. The way the wind moved through the lilac bush outside my bedroom window, rattling against the glass on spring nights, like a polite ghost asking to come in. That house wasn't just wood and drywall. It was my mother's voice echoing through Sunday mornings, her perfume, jasmine and vanilla, lingering on pillowcases long after she passed. It was my father's laugh, my scraped knees, my first kiss under the porch, light, and I gave it away. 5 years before the honeymoon, I was a woman unraveling slowly. My mother had died the year before after a long illness, and I had just been let go from my job as a high school literature teacher. Budget cuts, they said. I said nothing. I packed up the poetry books and the mug with World's Okayest Teacher in chipped red letters and walked out with a box that held everything except the feeling of worth. Grief is not always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, so quiet you can hear it breathing next to you. That's how I felt in that house, as if every corner was watching me fade. And then Marcus arrived. I met him at a bookstore downtown, the kind with dust in the corners, and a cat that never moved from the windowsill. I was flipping through a secondhand copy of Beloved when he made a comment about how Morrison knows how to make pain feel poetic. I laughed. Not because it was funny, but because someone had finally said something that didn't feel empty. He was charming. That much was obvious, confident in a way that didn't announce itself too loudly. His watch caught the light when he reached for a book, and I remember thinking, that's a man who's used to getting what he wants. And what he wanted, eventually, was me. It started with small things, a coffee, a late-night call to check if I was okay, a box of groceries left on my porch with a post-it that said, "You've got to eat, warrior woman." I should have known then. No one calls you warrior woman when they actually believe you're strong. They call you that when they want to feel like the hero in your story. When I fell behind on my mortgage, he stepped in. "Don't be proud," he said, brushing my hair back like I was a stray cat he'd decided to feed. "Let me help you. It's just money." I told myself it was kindness. I told myself he loved me. But kindness doesn't come with strings. And love doesn't keep a ledger. Marcus slowly moved in. Not physically at first, but emotionally, psychologically. He had a way of making me feel like I was lucky to be chosen, like I had value because he had decided I did. 6 months in, he suggested I sell the house. "It's just walls, Ava. Too many memories keeping you stuck. You can't heal here." What he meant was, you can't be controlled here. Not fully, but I didn't hear it then. I heard wisdom, compassion, a man trying to help me start over. So I did. I packed up my mother's wedding dress, yellowed with age. I donated the floral china she only brought out on holidays. I kept a box of old photographs tucked away in the trunk of my car, but even those began to feel like dead weight. Dana, my best friend since college, came to help me pack. She picked up a framed picture of my mom and me in the garden and sighed. "You don't have to do this, you know." "I want to," I lied. She gave me that look. The one only real friends give you. The one that's part worry, part knowing. Part "you're breaking my heart right now and I can't stop you." He doesn't like strong women, Eva. He likes projects. And you're not a project. But I felt like one. I felt broken. And Marcus made it so easy to pretend I wasn't. The day I handed the keys to the new owners, I sat on the porch steps for an hour, staring at the cracked paint on the railing. I picked at it with my thumb until it came off in flakes like old skin. I cried, but only a little. I told myself I was making room for a new chapter. But something important stayed behind. That house had history, yes, but it also had roots. And once I left it, I was untethered. Marcus's apartment felt like a showroom. Everything in its place, leather and chrome, art that didn't mean anything. And me, his grateful little warrior woman. I see it clearly now. The betrayal didn't start in Italy. It started in that bookstore. Or maybe even earlier, when I let grief hollow me out enough to believe I needed rescuing. It wasn't love. It was acquisition. And I didn't fall for a man. I fell for a mirror. One that reflected not who I was, but who I was afraid to be without him. I thought I was being saved. I didn't know I was being claimed. We were home less than a week when the pretending became unbearable. The Amalfi sun still lived in my skin, but everything else had gone cold. Marcus was colder too, his affection a flickering light bulb, unreliable and humming with irritation. I played my role as best I could. The good wife, the smiling one, the grateful recipient of his grand hollow gestures, but something had cracked open in Italy. And once something cracks, it never really fits the same way again. I started noticing things I had trained myself to ignore. The way he winced when I used words he didn't understand. The patronizing pat on the back when I mentioned wanting to apply for teaching positions again. The casual way he'd refer to me as the scholarship wife when we were with his friends. A joke, always a joke. But no one was laughing, not even me. One evening, he came home late from drinks with colleagues, tossed his keys on the marble counter, and muttered something about me finally contributing if I managed to land a part-time job. I swallowed my pride like a bitter pill, smiled tight-lipped, and offered him leftovers. He didn't thank me. He never did anymore. It wasn't that I needed gratitude. I just needed to stop feeling like furniture. 3 nights later, I went looking for a receipt for a courier delivery. I told myself I'd only check his office drawers quickly and quietly just to get the damn thing and get out. His desk was pristine, like everything else he owned. Expensive pens, leather notebooks, a silver letter opener shaped like a dagger. He always said, "Chaos is for amateurs." The drawer opened easily. Inside, folders, labeled, color-coded, precise. I found the courier file and pulled the receipt. But just as I was closing the drawer, something caught my eye. A red tab sticking out from the folder labeled Asset Management. My breath stuttered. I told myself not to open it, that it wasn't mine, that boundaries mattered. But boundaries are for marriages built on trust, not transactions. Inside the folder was a stack of documents, insurance forms, tax returns, investment spreadsheets. And then, the list. At first, I didn't understand what I was looking at. Rows of dates, descriptions, amounts. Winter coat, $325. Therapy sessions, $1,200, 6 months. Vet bill for her cat, $210. Braces consultation. $75, she never followed up. Dental work, July, $600, no thanks given. My vision blurred. He had cataloged me, every cent he'd spent, every gesture, every kindness, like I was a ledger entry. A living, breathing debt. There were notes in the margins written in that sharp, all-caps scrawl of his. Worth it? Emotional ROI unclear. Long-term benefit if kept compliant. Compliant. I pressed my palm to my chest, trying to anchor myself, but I was already floating. Then, beneath the spreadsheet, I found the prenuptial agreement. I'd signed it 2 weeks before the wedding, in a rush between dress fittings and cake tastings. I hadn't read the fine print. Marcus had said it was standard procedure. I'd trusted him. The folder was thick with annotations from his lawyer. I saw the phrase risk mitigation circled in red. My name appeared again and again, as if I were a liability to be managed, not a partner to be loved. My knees buckled. I barely made it to the bathroom before I dropped to the floor and vomited. The tile was cold. Comforting, in a way. Like the world was trying to soothe me. I don't know how long I stayed there. Long enough for my legs to go numb. Long enough to cry myself raw. Long enough to remember every moment that now felt like a lie. The time he brought me soup when I was sick. The necklace he gave me, just because. The night he said he admired my mind. All of it. Tallied. Quantified. Graded like I was some failed exam. I sat against the tub, my nightgown twisted around my thighs, mascara streaked down to my chin. I looked like a woman who had lost something, but in the mirror across from me, I saw something else. My reflection was a stranger, pale, hollow-eyed. But behind those eyes, there was fire. Not a blaze, not yet, but the flicker of it. The spark, and that was the moment everything changed. I didn't sob again. I didn't scream. I simply stared into that mirror and whispered, "You married a charity case, but now you're going to see what I'm worth." I stood up slowly, wiped my mouth, washed my face with cold water. The faucet gurgled like it was laughing at me. I ignored it. Outside the bathroom door, I heard Marcus snoring faintly in the bedroom. and for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of what came next. He had built a prison out of generosity, wrapped control in ribbons, but he made one fatal mistake. He underestimated the thing he thought he owned, and he kept receipts. But I keep memories. And I know how to turn pain into purpose. He called me an investment. He was about to find out just how expensive betrayal could be. I didn't leave him in a storm. There were no screaming matches, no smashed glasses or suitcases flung into the night. That would have given him too much satisfaction, made him feel like the martyr, the long-suffering husband of a woman too fragile to handle his generosity. No, I left like a shadow. Quiet, intentional, without apology. The first morning. After I found the spreadsheet, I made him breakfast. Scrambled eggs. Toast with fig jam. His favorite espresso, 2 sugars, no cream. He kissed my forehead and called me his little dove. I smiled. It was the last time I'd let him touch me. Over the next few days, I began my escape. Not a sprint, but a steady withdrawal, like a tide pulling away from shore. I used an old email address Marcus didn't know about to contact Maria Gutierrez, an old colleague from my teaching days. She now managed a botanical garden an hour outside the city, nestled in a quiet town with more trees than traffic lights. They needed seasonal help. I could start the following week. Low pay, under the table. She didn't ask questions, only said, "Come as you are." I packed slowly. Just the essentials. Books, my journals, a few clothes that still smelled like the old version of me. I left the diamond ring on the velvet tray where he'd first placed it. A stone that had never warmed. To my skin. I rented a modest cottage at the edge of a lake. Cash only. No forwarding address. I switched to my maiden name. I became someone he couldn't search for. Someone he had lost. Not because I was missing, but because I was done being found. The cottage was small, barely bigger than a dollhouse, with creaking floorboards and lace curtains that fluttered like breath. But it had a porch swing and a view of the water, and for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel like a punishment. I slept with the windows open. I let the wind carry away the rot of his voice. At the garden, I worked in the shade of lemon trees and wild ferns. My hands, once polished and manicured, grew calloused from digging and pruning. I didn't mind. There was something sacred in coaxing life from dirt. Something honest. I spoke little, smiled when I had to. I kept a journal in the shed behind the nursery, tucked behind a row of rusted tools and broken flower pots. I wrote every day, sometimes a line, sometimes pages. Everything I'd swallowed, I poured into those pages. Anger, shame, grief. One day I wrote, "I thought I was a rose he'd rescued. I was soil he wanted to own. There was a woman at the nursery, Judith, late 60s, wiry gray hair, voice like smoked honey. She noticed my quiet. She never asked what I was running from. Only offered me her thermos of tea and told me stories about plants that bloom once every 10 years. Some things take time, she'd say. And some things need fire before they bloom. I collected evidence, piece by piece, photographs of his spreadsheets, copies of the prenup and emails I'd found, voice memos I recorded whenever he called to guilt-trip me. You just vanished. Eva. People are asking questions. I gave you everything and this is how you thank me? Are you off your meds again? I let him believe I was unwell. It fed the version of me he'd already crafted. The helpless girl, the unstable wife. I played the part. But inside, I was documenting everything, not for court, for truth. Revenge wasn't about ruining him financially. That would be too easy, too loud. What I wanted was far colder. I wanted silence that echoed. A void where he used to matter. Life rebuilt so beautifully he'd never get to touch it. He called less as the weeks passed. Left longer silences between voicemails. I knew his ego wouldn't allow him to chase too long. He'd tell himself he was giving me space. That's what narcissists do. They reframe your abandonment as their mercy. One morning, I caught sight of myself in the cracked mirror above the kitchen sink. My hair was wild from the wind, dirt beneath my fingernails, the faint trace of sun on my skin. I looked like a woman coming back from something. I whispered to my reflection, "Revenge isn't fire, it's ice." I meant it. Fire burns out too, quickly. But ice lingers. Ice changes landscapes. Ice remakes the world in silence. That night, I opened my journal and drew a line down the center of a page. On one side, I wrote, "What he took," on the other, "What I'm taking back." I wrote until the ink bled through. He took my voice. I'm reclaiming it. He took my home. I'm building another. He took my name. I made it holy again. And in a garden shed behind the lemon trees surrounded by dirt and life, I became dangerous. Not loud, not broken, sharp and ready. Reinvention doesn't begin with fireworks. It starts in silence. For me, it began with an old laptop, a cracked coffee mug, and a Wi-Fi connection that barely reached the corner of the cottage. I started watching coding tutorials at night, curled, beneath a quilt stitched by my mother. JavaScript, HTML, CSS. It felt like learning a new language, one with clean rules, logical outcomes, no emotional traps. There was a comfort in it. In the way lines of code could shape a world from scratch. If I wrote it correctly, it would work. There were no moods to navigate, no pride to placate, just inputs and outputs, cause and effect. By day, I worked in the garden. By night, I studied. I slept little. But I wasn't tired, I was hungry. 3 months after I disappeared, I launched my first website for a local bakery. The owner, a kind widow named Louise, insisted on paying me in both cash and warm cinnamon rolls. "You're sharp," she said, patting my hand. "Whatever you're running from, honey, you're already outrunning it." I smiled, but said nothing. Each site I built added to a fund I called Freedom. I kept the total in a separate ledger, black leather, no labels. A quiet contrast to the spreadsheet Marcus had kept. His had been a record of ownership. Mine was a testament of rebirth. And here's the thing. Marcus never revoked my access to his accounts. Maybe it was arrogance. Maybe he thought I wouldn't. Understand the numbers. Each week, I logged in. Quietly, carefully. His wine club subscriptions had tripled. He sold one of his vintage watches. His investments were increasingly erratic. A real estate flip that went sour. A cryptocurrency gamble that backfired. The man who once held power like a blade was now bleeding it in slow drips. I watched him. Spiral. I didn't gloat. I documented. I built a dossier, a digital vault full of screenshots, emails, voicemails, and bank records. And then, one sleepless night, I found what I hadn't even been searching for. Infidelity. Not just emotional neglect, not just condescension, actual betrayal. There were receipts, hotel bookings in the city, dinners charged to his corporate card, and photographs on social media, tagged by a blonde with surgically symmetrical features and captions like power couple vibes, all while we were still married. I stared at her photo for a long time. Not with rage, not even sadness, just a strange, numb clarity. He hadn't cheated because I was lacking. He had cheated because she would never ask him to be accountable. She fit his image. She would never challenge the myth of him. I didn't cry. I filed it under a new folder. Leverage. Then I picked up the phone. "Hello?" a familiar voice answered. "Dana," I whispered. "I'm ready." Dana and I hadn't spoken in over a year, not since she'd warned me about Marcus, her voice cautious but firm. He doesn't want an equal. He wants a project. I had shut her out then, convinced myself she was just bitter or jealous. Now I knew. She hadn't been cruel. She had been kind in a way I hadn't known how to receive. When we met again, she didn't ask for an apology. She just hugged me tight and said, "You look different." "I am," I said. "Or at least, I'm becoming." Dana was a lawyer now, civil litigation, sharp and strategic. Over late-night coffees and whispered conversations, we laid out a plan. I showed her the dossier. She didn't flinch. "I can't promise he won't fight dirty," she warned. Men, like him, always do. I'm counting on it, I said. Symbolic rituals followed, as if the fire in me needed fuel. I dyed my hair, not blonde or red, just a rich espresso brown, darker than before. A deliberate shift. A new shadow to wear. Then, the dress. The wedding. Dress had been preserved in a plastic garment bag, still hanging in the back of a forgotten closet at the cottage. Ivory silk, lace sleeves, chosen during a time when I believed in forever. I didn't donate it. I didn't sell it. I burned it. In the fire pit behind the cottage, under a sky smeared with stars, I lit the hem with a kitchen match. The flames caught, quickly, greedy and golden. I watched it collapse into itself, bit by bit. The train, the veil, the bodice that once clung to a woman desperate to be seen. The smoke curled around me like a ghost saying goodbye. I slept that night without dreaming. Changed my name back officially. Reclaimed the one on my birth certificate. The one written on my mother's letters, still tucked in a shoebox beneath my bed. It felt like lighting a candle in a dark room. Quiet, but radiant. Every part of this transformation was deliberate. Not for him. For me. I wasn't trying to prove anything anymore. I was recovering the woman I had once believed was lost forever. She had never been lost. She had only been waiting for me to stop apologizing and start remembering. I began to dress differently too. Not in reaction to Marcus's taste, but in alignment with my own skin. Linen shirts, loose denim, a soft amber perfume that reminded me of my mother's vanity table, worn leather and lilac dust. The woman in the mirror no longer flinched. She no longer waited to be chosen. She chose herself, and Marcus. He would never see this version of me coming. He thought he had buried me beneath gratitude and gold. But I was not buried. I was planted, and I was blooming, beautifully, beyond his reach. I chose the restaurant carefully. It was the same one where, years ago, Marcus had first introduced me to his colleagues, where he called me his brilliant, beautiful miracle, while gripping my waist like a trophy he'd won at auction. Back. Then I wore a borrowed dress and smiled like I belonged, even though I was shaking inside. Tonight I wore a tailored navy jumpsuit, and the necklace he once told me was too extravagant for someone who didn't work. I bought it myself. Pearl. And gold. Elegant, understated, heavy in a way that grounded me. It sat at the base of my throat like a secret I was finally ready to speak. I arrived early. I always did now. The maitre d' recognized me and tilted his head politely. Table for two? Yes, I said, voice even. Reservation under. Delaney, my maiden name. It tasted like steel on my tongue, strong, clean. They seated me in the corner booth, Marcus's favorite. It had privacy, power, and just enough reflective glass to admire oneself between sips of wine. The waiter came. I ordered sparkling water with a twist of lime. No wine tonight. I wanted clarity. I ran my fingers along the edge of the linen napkin, rehearsing the script I'd written and rewritten in my head 100 times. But deep down, I knew I wouldn't need it. I didn't need to perform anymore. I only needed to finish what I started. Marcus arrived 12 minutes late. Not because he was busy, because he always needed to make an entrance. He wore his arrogance like a second skin. Cuffed shirt sleeves, a blazer just snug enough to suggest youth. His cologne hit me like a memory I didn't want, sharp and artificial. He spotted me and smiled like a man already forgiven. Eva, he said, sliding into the booth across from me. You look expensive. I let the comment hang in the air. He thought it was a compliment. I bought this myself, I said softly. With money I earned. He blinked. A micro flicker of confusion, quickly masked by a smirk. Well, good. For you. I always said you had potential, didn't I? I didn't reply. Instead, I reached into my bag and placed a slim leather folder on the table. He eyed it, amused. Is this a peace offering? Let's call it closure, I opened it slowly, page by page. First, the spreadsheet. His ledger of shame, itemizing every dollar he spent on me as though I were a timeshare or a depreciating asset. I let it sit in front of him like a mirror. Next, the prenuptial agreement. Highlighted sections, annotations from Dana's legal team, a copy of the amendment we had both initialed and forgotten, rendering the document void in the event of infidelity. He didn't move, didn't blink, but I saw the twitch in his jaw, the beginning of the unraveling, and finally, a small USB drive in a velvet pouch. "What the hell is this?" he asked. "Audio files," I said, sipping my water, "including one from last month." "You were drunk. She was recording." He swallowed. "I don't know what you think you're doing." "I'm divorcing you, Marcus." My voice didn't rise. "And thanks to everything in this folder, I'll be taking half, plus damages." He stared at me like I'd spoken a language he didn't understand. "This is a bluff," he hissed. "You're not even capable of this. You don't understand how the world works." I finished for him. "That's what you told me. Remember when you convinced me to sell my mother's house? When you laughed about how I couldn't survive on my own?" His face was turning red. The waiter appeared, sensed the tension, and retreated without a word. "You're nothing without me," Marcus spat. "You think learning to type and growing tomatoes makes you a woman of substance?" I leaned in, not angry, not smug, just resolute. "No, but surviving you does." He opened his mouth again. I reached into the folder and pressed play on my phone. His voice crackled through the speaker, unmistakable. Slurred, venomous, proud. "Of course she's still in love with me. She owes me everything. The house, her teeth, her damn self-esteem. I made her. I stopped it after 17 seconds. That was enough." Marcus went quiet, pale. "Still, you underestimated me," I said. "You mistook silence for weakness, but I was listening, and I never forgot." He didn't speak again. Not a word. I stood up slowly, folded the folder shut, and slipped it back into my bag. "For what it's worth," I said, adjusting my coat, "I do hope you find someone who actually wants to fix you. I'm just not in that business anymore." Didn't wait for a reply. I walked past the valet stand, past the people laughing over cocktails and calamari. Outside, the night was cool and quiet. I inhaled deeply, not as a declaration, not as a performance, just a breath. Clean and new. I returned to the cottage that night in silence, the kind of silence that no longer ached. I walked through the garden shed, the one I'd turned into a sanctuary. I lit a small lantern and pulled on gloves. I dug a small hole near the center of the garden, where the soil was soft and dark, and I planted a single white rose. Not for Marcus, for her. The girl who once sold her mother's home to feel worthy, who begged a man to love her just enough to stay. I didn't need to carry her anymore. I just needed to bury the shame and let something honest grow, because revenge had never been the goal. Freedom was. And justice? Justice was not loud. It was the quiet click of a lock behind me, and the sound of nothing, absolutely nothing, pulling me back.